Right now, we're talking about a lawsuit that has been filed against the IHSA yesterday, and it's being brought by the Better Government Association, and they're being represented by government transparency attorney Matt Topic of the law firm of Loevy Loevy. And first of all, Matt, thanks so much for being on today.
Thanks, Dave. Very happy to be here.
You know, I think when we talk about this, one of the key issues is the Freedom of Information Act and how the IHSA has viewed it and how you guys view it, representing the Better Government Association.
Yeah, so the Freedom of Information Act, it's also called FOIA. This is a law that says the public is entitled to access to government records. And the key thing at issue in this case is whose records are subject to the Freedom of Information Act. So certainly, you know, things like state government, local government, there's no question that those are public bodies and they are subject to the Freedom of Information Act. But the statute also says that it applies to things like subsidiaries of public bodies, which would be entities that, even though maybe they're facially private entities, maybe they're a nonprofit or something like that, that if they are basically controlled by units of government, then those records are subject to FOIA as well. Also, if the government has a private entity perform a governmental function on its behalf, then those records are subject to FOIA also. And so, you know, even though IHSA is a quote-unquote private entity, we think they meet both of these definitions.
And, you know, I know that you've had issues with trying to get that information from the IHSA, but I also realize that there's a local school district that is involved in the situation, and they do meet the requirements to get that information from, don't they?
Yes, well, certainly school districts are subject to the Freedom of Information Act. There's a provision, though, that says, this goes to that governmental function point, that if government contracts a governmental function to a private entity, then you have to make a request to the government entity to get the records of that private entity. And so we made a request to a local school district in Cook County, who's an IHSA member and who has a member on the IHSA board. And we asked that district to get records from IHSA that IHSA wasn't giving us. And they denied that request, so that's why they're involved in the suit as well.
And this has been going on for how long, Matt, the issue of getting the information that you requested?
We've been trying for a couple months to get the records, but there's been a lot of other attention that's been paid to IHSA by the General Assembly on transparency and other issues, and this is an issue really around the country, that when you have an entity like this that's really responsible for controlling pretty much every relevant aspect of high school competition, and when that applies overwhelmingly to the vast majority of school districts in the state, that, you know, when you're doing functions like that, there should be transparency into the process. There should be transparency into who works there, into what the contracts say, so that the public can determine whether this kind of an entity is acting in the best interest of public schools and public school students.
Now, will this lawsuit, if you guys win for the Better Government Association, will this get you all the information that you've requested and needed, and maybe will open the door for you to maybe ask other schools as well for Freedom of Information Act info?
Yeah, it would give us at least a starting point to get a better understanding of what IHSA exactly is doing on a variety of issues. The fundamental issue is whether we're entitled to records from IHSA at all. And so, you know, if we prevail on that, and we think that we will, then that will subject them to the Freedom of Information Act in full. And so anyone who wants to get records from IHSA should be able to do so. Now, there are some exemptions for certain kinds of records that would apply to any public body. So there's certain things that the legislature has said, you know, we're making these exempt, if the public can't have access to these things like security plans or certain things related to personnel matters or social security numbers and things like that.
And I know that there has been some talk that they had made some statements maybe a year ago that probably opened them up for the Freedom of Information Act by the way they said their organization was operating.
Yeah, a few years ago, IHSA was sued by, I believe it was a high school principal who had been suspended or something of that sort. And IHSA argued to the trial court and then to the appellate court that they should enjoy a certain type of governmental immunity. Immunity means basically that you can't be sued. We would never even reach the question of whether they violated the law, and that was a defamation and negligence suit. So they argued that that they enjoyed the same benefit as local units of local government. They said that they were, quote, organized for the purpose of conducting public business, that they're a state actor. They talked about the pervasive involvement of local government entities in their organization. They said not only do local government entities own IHSA, but employees of the local entities control the IHSA's governing body. All of these statements are very, very relevant to the question of whether they are also a public body subject to FOIA. So the way we would look at it is they can't, on one hand, argue that they get the benefits of being considered a governmental entity, but then, on the other hand, not have the obligations that go along with that.
When you look at all this, you talked about other states. I know Tennessee has been involved. Is it something that these associations that you feel have done over the years that has led to this, and they've just probably done what they've always done, and that's where the issue's at?
Talk about privatization, not only related to this, but all kinds of different issues in which government is privatizing its functions, and it's an important thing to make sure that that there's transparency when that happens, and that the public can determine if groups like this are really acting in the public interest as they should be.
Are you getting a lot of people contacting you that want to have this lawsuit go through, or is it just something that you're working with the BGA? Because I know there's a lot of interest around the entire state, and there are, like the Sun-Times doing their articles on it and stuff, that have pushed it a little bit.
Yeah, there's been a good amount of attention lately to IHSA, both through legislative hearings and through various things that have been reported in the press. So there's been a lot of interest in this issue, and I expect that's going to continue and maybe even grow.
And Matt, this is not your first rodeo. Is this typical of some of the FOIA incidents that you've been involved in, where people really fight giving you the material?
Yes, I file a lot of Freedom of Information Act lawsuits for the Better Government Association and other people. Well, there are some public bodies that do a terrific job of going out of their way to make sure that they're being transparent and giving people everything they're entitled to and more. There are other public bodies who fight tooth and nail and are very difficult to deal with when you're just trying to get basic information. So we have a fair number of suits where there really shouldn't have ever been any dispute as to whether we're entitled to records. And so when that happens, then we pursue that to make sure that there's transparency when there ought to be. There have been, this issue of privatization has certainly been a big issue, a hotter issue. We've filed a somewhat similar suit recently against the nonprofit that recently took over operation of Navy Pier. And again, that's just a function of what seems to be a trend of having private entities perform governmental functions.
And what's the time process on this? Now that the lawsuit's been filed, what do you do as an attorney in this process now, and how long is that going to take, would you think?
Well, the next step is for IHSA and for the individual school district who are the defendants to answer the complaint. And that should happen in the next 30 days or so. After that, then we'll have to figure out with the court how the court wants to proceed exactly in terms of what motions and how we're going to go about getting it resolved. The statute, though, says that these cases are supposed to be expedited to the extent possible because timeliness is newsworthiness in a lot of instances. So there's a mechanism in the statute to really encourage getting these cases moving quickly, so that it doesn't take years to get information.
And is there anything that we're missing on this lawsuit that you'd like to tell us about before we let you go, Matt?
Well, I think just taking a step back. I mean, I think we believe very strongly that we have a legal entitlement to these records. But even taking a step back, I really struggle to understand what justification there is for withholding this. This is This is an entity that has a very important function that impacts an awful lot of school districts and individual high school athletes and other competitors. They generate money from events that involve public school students, often at public institutions and public facilities, and I struggle to think of any reason why there shouldn't be transparency into that process.
Right now, we've been talking to Matt Topic from Loevy Loevy Law Firm, and he is a government transparency attorney representing the Better Government Association. And once again, Matt, I know I've told you before, but I really appreciate you taking this time to talk to us and kind of explain what's going on. Possibly in the future we can keep in contact if that's okay.
That'd be great, Dave. It was a pleasure talking to you, and happy to talk with you anytime.
We've been talking with Matt Topic right here on StatelineSportsHub.com. This is Dave Schmidt.